You are listening to Fantha Tracks.
Because of the following special program, Wonder Woman and the Incredible Hulk will not be presented this evening.
It's time to get all your Star Wars news in a single file. This is Making Tracks. Here are your hosts, Mark Newbold and Mark Mulcaster.
That's not true. That's impossible.
You're listening to Making Tracks. My name's Mark Newbold, and today myself and Mark Mulcaster are joined by our very special guest, Katherine Winchell. Katherine was instrumental in setting up Pride Squadron, which is an offshoot of a number of costuming groups, including the 501st, the Rebel Legion, and many more. So we talked to Katherine about how the group was set up, what their goals and aims are, what they're looking forward to doing in the future. So let's get straight into it. This is me and Mark chatting with Katherine Winchell, all about Pride Squadron, special episode of Making Tracks for Pride Month. We're joined here today on Making Tracks by Katherine. Katherine started Pride Squadron. We're going to talk all about this today and loads of Star Wars stuff, which of course is why we all get together to chat about stuff, because Star Wars is the best thing ever in the world. Before we do that, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Pleasure. Now, loads to talk about, but I'm going to kick off with a really straightforward and simple question. Is Omega the most awesome character in Star Wars right now or not?
Oh, man. I can't just pick one. There's so many awesome characters in Star Wars. I've been enjoying her. Yeah, I think she's a lot of fun. I enjoy how Bad Batch has gotten a little bit of adventures and babysitting flavor to it.
That's a great way of putting it. Yeah,
it is. When a new Star Wars show begins, what are your hopes and expectations from that? Because we've had so much Star Wars content over the last, where are we now? 2021. So the last 6 years, let's say 7 years if you include Rebels. So many new things coming into canon and continuity. What is it that you look for with a brand new show?
I mean, the first thing is just I want to see good, engaging storytelling. But in terms of like actual content, I'm a huge fan of the Jedi and anything like adjacent to that. I have been really enjoying Bad Batch because I do love the clones. To be on topic, I do also, hope for there to be queer content on screen. We haven't seen a lot of that on screen, unfortunately. Even with the characters who are confirmed as being part of the LGBTQ community in books and comics, we never see it on screen. That's something that I hope for.
So it's Pride Month, obviously, is one of the reasons, not the only, but one of the reasons why we're talking. And so of the characters that are out there now, for somebody completely uneducated like me, what characters would you point me towards? What characters would you say?
I have two personal favorites. Ahsoka, obviously, is probably the most well-known character who's part of the community. And that's within E.K. Johnston's book, the Ahsoka novel, the YA novel, is where we really start to dig into that. Why don't you love Ahsoka? She's great. Everybody loves Ahsoka. The other one that came far before that, Ferris Olin in Jude Watson's chapter books, that I read those as tween, early teenager. And that's something where, these were the early 2000s that these were being published. It was Scholastic. I hesitate to even call it subtext because it's really text, like it's there. And the author, she confirmed in 2015 that in the last of the Jedi series, Rowan Lands, who is referred to as Ferris's partner, and they're business partners, but they live together and they've adopted this street kid together kind of thing. They're married, they're husbands. Yeah. And that's something that it's clear within the books, especially so Ferris, for those who don't know him, within Legends, he was a Jedi Padawan who, due to some tomfoolery with Anakin being Anakin, that got another Padawan killed, who was one of Ferris's best friends. Ferris ended up leaving the Order, which it's funny that I also talk about Ahsoka because they're two very similar stories. It's interesting that both of them are Order 66 survivors by the fact of just not being there. Ferris left the Order not because of anything terrible with Ahsoka. I mean, so it was terrible, but it wasn't terrible on the same kind of scale as with Ahsoka, and found a new life for himself. And part of that is meeting Rowan, who he ended up entering a relationship with and being married to in between the two series that we see him in. And then the Last of the Jedi series really opens up with, now it's the Empire and Obi-Wan hearing about this crazy guy, Ferris Olin, who's like trying to kick the Empire off of his planet by himself, basically. And Obi-Wan's just like, oh, geez, because like he remembers this kid because Ferris was the Padawan of like one of his best friends in Legends. So he goes to help with all that. And there's a conversation between Ferris and Obi-Wan that like makes it extremely clear that like this is a romantic relationship between Ferris and Rowan because they're talking about attachment. The conversation between Obi-Wan and Ferris really does make it clear that like that's what's going on between Ferris and Rowan. They talk about how, attachment is not something that was congruent within the Jedi Order because, like there's other priorities that a Jedi has to have. But now like things have changed and Obi-Wan is basically saying like, yeah, like I get it, like you have this attachment, but I still need you to do Jedi things right now because we're in trouble. That's something that was really profound for me, and at that point when I was reading these books for the first time, I didn't have words for my own queer identity, but it was something that struck me is like that kind of conversation, Obi-Wan's acceptance of that, not even blinking about the fact that it's a gay relationship. The conversation that's being had is just like, Jedi aren't supposed to do this, but like, Ferris left, but now is, kind of being the hero's journey. He's answering the call to action again of, like, well, now most of the Jedi are dead and there's the Empire and like, oh, hey, Anakin, that kid you didn't like, guess what? Turns out you were right. He's kind of a mess. So yeah, I love Ferris so much.
Just going back to Ahsoka, actually, I tend to audiobook more than I tend to read just because commute. And so I listened to the Ahsoka novel and I really enjoyed it. But I didn't pick up on any kind of queer undertones or something with the character. So I suppose the question is, how overtly do you think these things need to be stated in the prose? Because if we take, for instance, another E.K. Johnson novel, which is Queen's Peril, that's very front and centre. And actually, I think what's very interesting with that is Padmé's own reaction when a girl kisses her by mistake, thinking that she's Saber, which I think is actually a kind of important story to actually have in that kind of book for that kind of reader.
Queen's Peril, the part for like where the summit starts up until like the actual invasion of Naboo starts, I love to call it the gay disaster section because like everything is coming to a head with that. And then like glitter is a plot point as well because like the whole thing about like the glitter glow stick thing exploding on Padmé's hands. So then they have to like swap Sabe in as the queen because, blah, 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 that whole thing. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I've talked to some other people before. A really good friend of mine who's, also a straight guy, telling him about like, oh yeah, like Jude Watson like confirmed that Ferris is gay. And he was like, what, really? What? I totally missed that. And it was just kind of like Ryan, and like listing all these things out. And he's like, oh yeah, you're right. And I mean, like, I'd say the same kind of thing with Ahsoka, like the part where Kaden is just like, oh, I could kiss you. Like, there's an interaction in there and Ahsoka's reaction to it is, oh, but there's other stuff going on at that point, and like E.K. Johnston has said that, like there was like the attraction was there for Ahsoka as well. It's just like they were in the middle of an Imperial base and Ahsoka has a lot of other stuff with her life. So I think that both are needed, both things that are really overt, like Padme getting kissed by a girl because the girl thinks that she's Sabe because she's dressed as Sabe.
Yeah.
It's something really interesting, honestly, is because like with Ferris and Rowan's story, it's really one of the most in-depth queer romances that Star Wars has. But like on page, they never say, like my husband, it's always my partner. And like, it's a little bit like undertone. Whereas obviously with Padme and Sabe and all of that, like, it's like, it's very obvious, but you don't actually see a relationship. It's the same kind of thing with Ahsoka. Like, I think having Ahsoka be confirmed as being part of the queer community in a more subtle way, like that's still really important to like, everybody who grew up with Ahsoka, who's part of the queer community within that story. That's not the place to tell a story about a relationship, really. Like there's not time for it there. In any case, in any kind of straight relationships, gay relationships, anything, one of the things that I actually really love about Star Wars is that it's not usually like shoving romance down your throat, like forcing it in like a lot of other media is. I like the Ahsoka novel the way it is, where it is kind of like a sidebar, but it still gets the point across, at least for me. I think part of why it's hard for some people to pick up on things is that so far Star Wars has not really used the words that we use. And I kind of get why. The fact that, like it's not concrete, it's duracrete, like that kind of thing. Like there's all these Star Wars words, but it's definitely something that I know there's a lot of different pieces at work here, and I'm, not going to say either way if they should use the exact. I think it very much depends on the situation.
Yeah.
But it's a complicated thing, and I think there's a lot of discussion within the queer community about like what on-page, on-screen representation versus, like an author being like, oh yeah, this character is bisexual. So far, I've liked what has been done in Star Wars in like balancing that kind of thing of, within Queen's Shadow and Queen's Peril, like you see Sabe interested in men and women between the two books. And in, on Twitter and stuff like that, E.K. Johnston has said, Sabe is somewhere on like the bi-pan spectrum of things. I won't get into those are two very similar identities. They are different, but I think that makes sense to me to do it that way, where like the content is within the books and then, actually giving it a name is something that's exterior to that. I think that works
within the Star Wars galaxy. Then this strikes me as you say this, because ever since the original film, when the insect guy is having a drink next to the wolf guy, next to the astronaut, when the Wookiee walks in and the Jedi and all that stuff, and it's the most diverse group of ecology you could pick. As an author who wants to get their point across, I guess you're saying that to use the correct terms to get it across to me, who might not pick up on these things. And you mentioned subtext earlier. Like you say, those Jude Watson books were quite overt, really, when you look back at them, quite unique for 20 years ago. But it feels like a lot of this has been subtext, that if you want to mine for this, you'll find it. But if you're not looking for it, you won't even see it. Do you think within the Star Wars galaxy, you just love who you love? And that there's not, I'm using, there's not straight or gay or whatever. It's just, I love this person, I love that person. But as an author, as a narrator of this story, you've got to give it some kind of framework to make it make sense to us humans in the 21st century reading it. Is that how it works? Does that make any sense?
I think that individual identities will still be important because it gives you terminology to be able to like find other people whose experience is the same as yourself and talk to them about it. But in terms of the Star Wars galaxy versus our own world, in terms of like prejudice and stuff like that, I don't think, with so many species out there, I don't think that there's any kind of prejudice against who you're in a relationship with. Just with like all the different species out there, I think that like trying to put a gender binary on it is silly. Even with humans, there's like gender is a spectrum, both in terms of like how you feel about your own gender, but also biologically. I think that's something that really is overlooked, is that like there are a lot of intersex people out there. Gender is a very wide range of things. Like once you bring aliens into it, there's really no reason that they would be, male and female the way that we see those things. I'm sure that at least with humans, by the nature of humans, like there will be things that people will find to be prejudiced about, but I doubt that one of those is who you love. We do see prejudice within Star Wars. We see anti-alien prejudice. We see prejudice against the clones. It is definitely there. People have found things to be prejudiced against. But I don't think that there's that kind of discrimination. But what I will say is that I think it's still really important to show the established characters as not blinking when something comes across like that. Like what I said earlier about with Obi-Wan and Ferris, the book Last Shot by Danielle Jose Older has a non-binary character in it who uses they, them pronouns. And I know it's really important for a lot of my friends who are non-binary that Han and Lando don't blink at the fact that there's this character who's being introduced with these pronouns. And that's really important because, that's something that a lot of people want to fight about whether or not they, them can be singular. And it can. Dictionaries and Shakespeare and all that, use they, them as a singular pronoun. But it's important to show these existing characters not being prejudiced for readers, but I would say that within the Star Wars galaxy, I don't see why there would actually be those prejudices.
This is Steve Bloom, voice of Zebralios, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks. Caravast. May the force be with you.
Pride Squadron. How did Pride Squadron come about? What was the genesis for making this happen?
So Pride Squadron came about my senior year, well, actually my junior year of college. I went to Western Washington University, and there is literally a dozen different queer clubs on campus there, which is awesome. And because of that, the school sponsored queer resource center got all of us together in a forum and was like, okay, there's a lot of you now, we should all talk to each other. And we started talking about what we could do together as a group. And me being a big nerd, the thing that I proposed was, let's have a queer Comic-Con.
Cool.
Because we're really, seeing a lot of genre sci-fi fantasy stuff that is queer these days, and I really want to celebrate that because at a lot of large conventions, there's the queer panel kind of thing, at least at the time, those years ago. The queer panel is always the same, and it's not that interesting. So I really wanted to have a space that could really dig into it at a deeper level. And everybody else was also super into this. So I was the director of that convention then my senior year. And at that point, I wasn't really out that much. I didn't have my name on the project, honestly. And so I was really going back and forth about whether or not to invite these, the Star Wars clubs, because I'd been a member of the Rebel Legion since my freshman year of college. I joined Rebel Legion basically as soon as I could, a few months after I turned 18 and made the age requirement. I had my Jedi costume done, beforehand, and I was just yeah, let's do this. But it was still it was a scary thing to think about coming out to, I was out to several people within my base and garrison, et cetera. But the idea of putting in an event request and telling everybody was scary. But then at the aforementioned big convention that year, one of the stormtroopers, he brought a rainbow pauldron with him just for funsies, and everybody really reacted really positively to it, and that made me feel okay with doing an event request for the convention. So I did, and there was a group chat that was started for that event, the way that with a lot of events it happens for carpools and meetups afterwards, blah blah blah. And then after the event was over, the group chat just didn't die. It was any other things that were queer Star Wars related, the group chat just kept going because of that. And then, we were talking about things, and there's other queer friends that we had who were in different locations of the world who were part of, Rebel Legion, 501st, Saber Guild. And it was kind of do we add them to this group chat? And then it was decided no, we should just we should make a group for everybody, not necessarily just our friends, but the way that Ladies of the Legion is for all of the women in the clubs, another informal affinity group like that for everybody who's part of the LGBTQ plus community. And so that's what we did. I sent an email to Bill Holmes that I intended this email to be kind of a asking permission kind of thing, but as I was rereading it, it was oh, this is more of an FYI. And I loved that. He was super supportive. And yeah, we started out as a Facebook group, and that remains kind of our primarily mode of communication and everything, like the other affinity groups like Ladies of the Legion, Walking Wounded, and now Galaxy of Color. And we do stuff now at conventions and stuff like that as well. We've moved, outside of online spaces, but yeah, it really all came out of that convention and has grown so much. We have roughly 550 members right now. It's a closed space, the same way that the other informal affinity groups are. It's only open to people who are part of the queer community who are within these clubs. And that's really for safety reasons. Just as much as I was scared about coming out to all of my base and garrison, there's other people who are also in that place now. So it's a private group because the decision to come out is really a personal one. And even if somebody is a really strong ally to the community, it's just easier to draw the line in the sand of okay, this is just for people who are part of the queer community. The same way that Ladies of the Legion is just for women, and Galaxy of Color is just for people of color. Walking Wounded is just for people who are, with a disability or something of that nature. So it's going great, honestly. We started in the beginning of May 2017. So we've been going for several years now. It's a great community. We've done stuff at Celebration in 2019. We had a booth and several panels, and all of that was like really well received. It was really great to like interact with the larger Star Wars community, people who aren't necessarily, just part of these clubs, even though that's, a lot of people who go to Celebration are in these clubs, but people, also who don't. It was a really like emotional experience to like talk to people who, like Pride Squadron's motto is representation is hope. And, that was really so much of that week was, seeing people so emotional over the fact that like there was this at a Star Wars convention, especially for older fans who, they never thought that they would see a rainbow flag at a Star Wars convention. And just that, like feeling seen within, something that's a huge part of their life. I mean, for a lot of us, Star Wars is a huge part of our lives. I can't imagine what my life would be without these costume clubs, because I joined when I was 18, and like off to college, like that's really like a large part of my adult life has been these clubs. So it is really important to like feel like your full self is accepted within this community. I'm excited to see where we go next. In addition to like stuff at conventions, we've been building relationships with the authors and other creators who either are part of the queer community themselves. We give them honorary memberships the way that the larger clubs gives honorary memberships. And for the authors like Danielle Jose Older, who, like contribute something really positive for queer relationship in Star Wars, we have been giving them ally awards. We do that primarily at conventions. And it's always so wonderful to like see, to like have our members have a chance to interact with them and really tell them like how much their writing has impacted them. Yeah, it's going great. I'm really glad that like, this is continued, and Lucasfilm has been really supportive of us. We reached out to Pete Vilmer the way that you do for doing like a merch run kind of thing. And right away, he was just like, yeah, absolutely. Like, here's the rules kind of thing, just the same way it is for Rebel Legion 501st kind of thing. Yeah, it's been great.
For everything in one location, daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video, and social media feeds, bookmark FanthaTracks.com for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
Obviously, you need to be a member of either the Rebel Legion, 501st, Mando Mercs, Dark Empire, Saber Guild, anybody
Droid
else,
Builders.
And Droid Builders, of course, in one way or another, a member of a kind of the LGBTQ community. Within the group, is it more of just a safe space? I mean, are you there for support, or is it what do you do? Is it just hang out and stuff like that on
Yeah, it's
online?
kind of everything. It's a place to talk about like when a new book or comic or whatever comes out that has queer representation in it. There's a lot of buzz about that. A place to like be excited about that. Be excited about like with Pride Month this year. Like there's some more Star Wars stuff that's coming out. I found rainbow Star Wars fabric at one of the like major fabric retailers, and like was excited about it. So yeah, it's a place to be excited about those things, especially for people who, again, like they're not out to, their families necessarily even, or like their friends at large. It's a place for them to like interact with the queer community. It's also a place for support when people are struggling with something. There's challenges, especially for like the transgender community, in building costumes and feeling comfortable in these costumes. If a trans woman feeling comfortable in a Princess Leia costume, or a non-binary person trying to decide like what kind of costume they want to do, because for the majority of these characters until very recently there weren't any non-binary characters that like you could do a costume of, just because we didn't have enough reference images for them. Yeah. We're starting to see like High Republic has 3 non-binary characters. And so far for High Republic, like we don't have quite enough images for costumes for anybody, but like we're definitely getting there. Mm-hmm. And there's also a character within Squadrons who's non-binary as well. But like before that, it was kind of like, if you want to do a face character, you're going to have to be, presenting as a guy or a girl. So that's a struggle for people. So it's a place to talk about that. It's a lot of things. The atmosphere is a lot like, after a troop where, like everybody's going out to dinner kind of thing, and you're just talking about whatever.
You mentioned there's some people within the group who are there before they've come out. Have you had any examples of people being in the group realizing obviously it's such a safe space, they've discussed it with like-minded people, and then come out? Have you got any good stories of that? Because it's obviously it's a different experience for every single person, isn't it?
Yeah, like I can't share the people's stories for them, but yes, that's definitely been a thing where like feeling supported within Pride Squadron has led people to have the confidence that, you know, like their base, garrison, clan, temple, spire, they'll find support within their local group as well. And, you know, if anything goes wrong, like they'll have a place to come and like talk about it as well and like sort out their feelings and, you know, figure out how to like respond to it in a way that's going to like be deconflicting rather than being messy. As well as like, you know, having a place to request resources, you know, like if somebody's, you know, like one of the leaderships within the club is wanting to learn more about something, you know, wanting to learn how to support their members, you know, we're really happy to help with that and be a resource, be a sounding board, or, you know, like on the global level for clubs, you know, when a club is, you know, wanting to make a Pride Month post and they're like, you know, we don't know like what flag to use and, you know, like what terminology, like we're always super happy, you know, like message the public Facebook page that Pride Squadron has. We're super happy to help proofread anything.
Besides obviously Star Celebration and you do panels, do you guys have like your own events, or is it always an event with the Rebel Legion or with the 501st?
We're an affinity group for these clubs. So at conventions and stuff like that, you know, like we'll have our own dinner, you know, like a dinner one night at a multi-day convention, or like if there's a pride parade in one state, you know, members from another state might travel into it. And then, you know, we'll be doing stuff before and after and, you know, sharing hotels, that kind of thing. Things are very much, you know, surrounded by these events because it is very much tied into these clubs.
All the clubs you've mentioned are global clubs. Do you find that actually country to country, base to base and garrison to garrison, there's different levels of understanding and acceptance of LGBTQ issues that you have to help guide through, say, the command or something like that, you know, somebody like myself?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are some differences, you know, I mean, in the wide variety of countries that the Rebel Legion, 501st, et cetera, has membership within like the books of laws of those countries, homosexuality is not legal in some of them.
Exactly, yeah.
So that's, you know, that's going to be a very different environment than somebody who is within a country where, you know, like pride parades are a thing. Yeah, there is some difference, but there's also a wide variety of things, you know, within like these clubs are primarily based out of the U.S. So, and there's a wide variety of experiences within the U.S. as well. There is some difference globally, but there's also a lot of difference within North America.
What's the biggest obstacle that people might come across? Yeah,
I think the biggest obstacle is just, you know, lack of education. The majority of people in these groups, you know, they're kind people. They don't want to hurt others. And so it's just a question of like educating them, you know, and they want to be educated about how to help their members, you know, how to provide a space that's equitable for all of their members. You know, it's a good place to be, is that, you know, it's where people want this to be a good space for everyone. It's just a matter of sitting down and having these conversations, and they can be tough conversations. They can be awkward for people who, you know, they're afraid of putting their foot in their mouth and stuff like that. And I think it's really important that we're providing a sounding board for people who do want to learn, because that shouldn't fall necessarily to like the member who's within the base. Like, you know, they have their own life. There might be too much going on. It can be a very emotional thing to do this education. So it's important to us to be able to provide a more global resource. And, you know, we have several moderators that are like several people within leadership. So, you know, even as like we ourselves are having our own lives, you know, we can tag team on stuff. And if somebody's, you know, not having a day where they're, you know, in the right mindset to explain these types of things, we can pass it off to somebody who is.
I can speak from my own experience. I've been a base commander for 4 years, and I was XO before that for 6 or 7 years. And yeah, you know, in the last 3 or 4 years especially, we've been very much trying to promote LGBTQ issues. We've got a couple of members in our group who you know, have helped us a lot with that, but not every single base or garrison has that kind of members who are willing to do that, because either they're not comfortable, like you said. So it's great to have a resource that we can kind of fall back on. After the interview, I'll be tapping you up for some bits and bobs and stuff. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
I do have another question. Celebrations next year. Are you guys planning to be there? Have you got big plans? Anything you can tell us?
Last year with Celebration Chicago, it wasn't last year. It feels like last year. 2020 didn't exist.
It didn't.
Last year we submitted like our application for like the booth and the panels independently, just because like we didn't know that there was going to be like the big Galactic Senate things that hadn't really been announced yet. But this year now, since then, like the Galactic Senate has, and for those who aren't familiar with the clubs, the Galactic Senate is a forum for like the leadership of the large Lucasfilm clubs as well as the affinity groups, which is really important to be able to like have at a global level, have people from Ladies of Legion and Walking Wounded there to advise, on like how they can make things better for all of these marginalized minority groups. So yeah, Pride Squadron is one of the like non-voting members of the Galactic Senate now. So I think I'm allowed to say this, but like, yeah, we will be doing things within the Galactic Senate this year. And yeah, we're really excited for that. More of the same kind of thing that we did last year in Chicago. We'll call it in Chicago.
Yes.
We're planning to have a table, like more cool freebies at the table. Last year we did pronoun buttons that were super popular. We put Ahsoka on the she, her, Lando on the he, him. We had like an original alien character for the they, them, because at that point we didn't have a non-binary character who uses those pronouns that we had like a depiction of.
Yeah.
We'll actually have like choices this next time as to like who we want to put on that. And then we also had a blank one that we put Revan on because Revan is whatever you want Revan to be. My own opinion on Revan is that Revan is like a gender fluid chaos being. Like that fits them in my opinion. But I love when we can have like clever things like that kind of thing. Yeah. And yeah, the pins are really popular. We'll do something like that again. Being within like the Galactic Senate space, it'll be easier for us to fundraise. In Chicago, we raised money, a few $1,000s for a local homeless shelter for queer youth. But like the way that convention stuff goes, like since we were with like the other fan tables, not the Galactic Senate ones, like we couldn't take cash donations. So we had to do everything digitally, which is difficult at a convention because the reception sucks.
Oh, yeah.
So we're excited this year to be able to, we'll most likely be raising money for a charity within like the Southern California area that helps queer youth who are struggling with housing. And yeah, we'll be able to do cash donations since we're going to be with the Galactic Senate clubs, which will make things a lot easier. And yeah, more panels. Since then, we've continued to like build relationships with people who work on Star Wars projects. E.K. Johnston, Daniel Jose Older. Man, I shouldn't name names because I'm going to forget somebody. But like, there's been a lot of people who've been like super supportive of us. And a event like Celebration is one where we can really like do stuff with them, which is always exciting. E.K. Johnston did a signing with us at Celebration Chicago, and that was super fun. Like she did other signings as well. But again, like creating a space where people feel comfortable. Like when she was signing at our table, people really felt comfortable like coming and talking to her about what was within like the Ahsoka novel. And at that point, it was Queen's Shadow was the only one that was out. But like now Queen's Peril is out, and Queen's Hope will be out by then as well, which I'm super excited for. I actually did an interview with her for Rebelthon last month, and we talked a little bit about how like there definitely will be more queer content in that. Super excited for that. More stuff with authors and other like people who work within the Star Wars like professionally community who are part of the queer community or are an ally who's really contributed something to representation.
And speaking of Rebelthon, you were one of the organisers, weren't you, I think?
Yeah, I was the executive director is the title that we came up for me on that. Yeah.
How did that all go in the end?
That was great, yeah. With like the merchandise run that we're following it up with, I think we're going to hit $20,000 for
Fantastic.
UNICEF. They're doing a lot of really important work right now with COVID aid, bringing these vaccines to parts of the world that they're not accessible to necessarily, especially with the cold chain thing. UNICEF has been bringing cold chain vaccines to remote areas for years, as I was actually doing research before Rebelthon, I found a bunch of stuff with Ian McGregor has been one of their spokesmen for a while, and he did a lot of stuff with cold chain vaccines in like 2011 or something like that. So just kind of like, oh, that's funny. That's, very relevant to what we're doing now. It was a lot of fun. We had about 30 guests that we interviewed, all really fantastic interviews. I love being able to pair up our members with people they're just going to vibe really well with. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. We're going to do Rebel Reads again this fall. Since most of like the queer content is in books and comics, you're definitely going to be hearing about some stuff with that again for there as well.
Well, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fingers crossed we see you in, I was going to say Chicago, that's years ago. We see you in Anaheim.
Definitely.
Huge thanks to Katherine for being a part of this special episode of Making Tracks. Now, if you want to be a part of the action and stay updated on all the latest Star Wars news, visit fanthatracks.com or check out the free Fanthatracks app through the App Store to follow us on your mobile device. You can reach out to us and send in your listeners' questions by emailing radio@fanthatracks.com. We'd love to hear what you think, especially about this episode. Comment, like and share on any of our social media feeds @Fanthatracks, and be sure to subscribe, leave a review, preferably a 5-star one, on Amazon Music, Audible, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcatcher or smart speaker of choice. And as always, thanks to James Semple for composing the Fanthatracks intro, Adam O'Brien for our Making Tracks opening music, and Mark Daniel and Vanessa Marshall for our voiceovers. Now, if you want to contact Pride Squadron, head to facebook.com/Pride Squadron and you can find out what's going on over there. And remember to tune in to our weekly Fanthatracks news show, Good Morning Tatooine, live on Sunday evenings at 9 p.m. UK time, 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific on Facebook and YouTube. And we'll see you for the next episode. Take care.
Coming up next on Fanthatracks Radio, it's another episode of Making Tracks.